had them online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Poe believed in me, pull up through some bucks down. Todd told the valet pull the truck round. Push the line after we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best from my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify, tap you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, you're too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for their prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the leaders he was planning. I had them all online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. Boy, that flight to Amsterdam. When my accountant and minus my family found out too and didn't like it. You're not in the salon with Dale said and I thought he was biased. Then I got a Venmo that said copy the finest. Before my foolishness settled in. Recorded a whole tape before we got to Berlin. This close to giving up and now never again. Don't overlook the work and come expecting to win. In the end, my word, never put nothing over the squad. Got it right up under their nose and fight a facade. Off the cliff with broken wings, I'm aware of the odds.
Greetings, everyone. Greetings, Black Power Media. Greetings, African people. This is Jackie Lukman, and welcome to a special edition of Lukman Nation Live, the most dangerous show on social media, on the most dangerous platform on social media, Black Power Media. I'm really excited about tonight's show because I've wanted to make sure that we didn't ignore the infrastructure bill that was just passed, and that is, I guess Biden has signed it into law. But I didn't want to be the one to dig into this because I'm not an economist. I know some things, but I don't know all the things about economics. But I just happen to know someone who does. And I am very, very happy to have that person in Dr. Linwood Tauheed as that person who is the font of all knowledge economical for as far as I'm concerned. And Dr. Tauheed is the associate professor of economics at the University of Missouri at Kansas City, frequent guest on By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik. Very, very happy to have you join us tonight to talk about this bill. Dr. Tauheed, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. I am absolutely pleased to be here.
So I don't want to waste any time with a whole bunch of pleasantries because this is such an unpleasant subject for me. I am always disappointed with the Democrats, Dr. Tauheed, as I am, always enraged at the Republicans. So I don't want anybody to get it twisted that I think that the Republican Party is any better than the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party disappoints on a regular basis. And I think they have almost outdone themselves with this fight over these two bills, the infrastructure bill and the so-called Build Back Better bill that has not been voted on yet. And I think that they've outdone themselves in disappointing people because of the way they are celebrating the passage of this infrastructure bill and the reality of what's really in it, who wins from this bill, who loses. And ultimately, before we're done, I want to get into who helped push this thing over the finish line, which is a huge, huge problem for us. But before I get into the details of having you explain the parts of this bill that are very problematic, I want to thank everybody who is joining us tonight. Appreciate you. If you are not a member of Black Power Media, you can join. You should join Black Power Media. Please subscribe to our channel on YouTube. You can follow and support us on Patreon. Share this video. Don't forget to hit the like button, all that good stuff. And stay tuned after this show for History as a Weapon, which is a really, really great podcast, which is really, really great show. All right. So let me get into Dr. Tauheed. What people are, the Democrats in particular, are so excited about in regard to this infrastructure bill. Now they're talking about all of this money for uh, roads and transit and the internet. And this is an article from Associated Press that folks are able to see. And they go into a little bit of detail about the money that is being
Mhm.
allocated for particular things. Like here they have $100 billion for roads and bridges,
Mhm.
39 billion for public transit, uh, 66 billion for passenger and freight rail,
Mhm.
7.5 billion for electric vehicle charging stations, 65 billion for broadband access to
Mhm.
improve internet services for rural, low-income families and tribal communities, 65 billion for modernizing the electric grid,
Mhm.
25 billion for airports, 55 billion on water and wastewater infrastructure.
Mhm.
But here's my very first problem, Dr. Tauheed. If you read through this entire list of wonderful things that this bill is supposed to provide to folks, you get down to the very last paragraph where the AP reports that this 5 year spending package will
Mhm.
be paid for
Mhm.
by spending $210 billion in unspent COVID-19 relief aid. Okay, which is fine. But then this is the kicker:
Mhm.
$53 billion in unemployment insurance aid that some states have halted
Mhm.
is how the Biden administration uh, will pay for this 5 year spending package. Is
Mhm.
it just me, Dr. Tauheed, or is that like the first really big red flag in this bill?
Well, I suppose that that's not a red flag for me.
Mm,
I mean, if the money hasn't been spent, if governors of states are saying we don't want that unemployment insurance, then okay, let's get it out into the public in a different way. Understand the governors of those red states, there were 27 of them, I believe, said they weren't going to take any more of the pandemic unemployment aid because they thought that the people who were receiving them in their states were not going back to work because they were just getting too much money from the government, right?
mm,
And so these are lazy people who don't want to work, and as long as the government gives them money, they won't go back to work. And there's a so-called labor shortage. We might talk about that. So getting that money back out into the public is a good thing. By the way, when that unemployment insurance was discontinued in those states, people didn't start going back to work. In fact, it had no effect on employment or unemployment in those states. So people aren't staying home because of getting a check or not getting a check. But as you talked about who was celebrating this bill, it should be interesting to note that Mitch McConnell is celebrating this bill even more than Nancy Pelosi,
mm.
and he's of course in the Senate, but he's the Senate leader, and he's basically saying, look what we've done for you, the Republicans, right? Because this is a bipartisan bill. And he's saying, they got 17 Republican votes, and if you didn't get those votes, this bill wouldn't have passed. And Mitch McConnell says, his leadership is responsible for that. That's a red flag. It
Mm,
is a
mm.
red flag when the Republicans can claim credit for a bill that the Democrats pushed over the line. Now, that's not the first time that's happened. I mean, even in, quote, recent history, NAFTA was a bill that was written in the Bush 1 administration that the Clinton administration pushed over the line.
That's right. That's
And then
right.
when we had the 2008 financial crisis, the Troubled Asset Recovery Program, TARP, which was the bailout, was written in the Bush second administration and was pushed over the line by Barack Obama. So it's not unusual for Democrats to push Republican bills over the line. And Mitch McConnell is letting you know that this is a Republican bill. Because, in spite of the fact that there are good things in this bill, there's, $1.2 trillion in infrastructure in various ways, physical infrastructure. Many years ago, not yesterday, but many years ago, engineers in this country estimated that we really needed about $4 trillion in infrastructure spending. So this is about a quarter of what we needed, some years ago. It's much less than that now. It's a good thing to fix roads and bridges and power grids and airports and other kinds of things. This bill is touted, at least Joe Biden. President Biden said that there would be 2 million new union jobs created every year with this. One of the problems is that there's no job training in this bill.
Aha.
So if you're not already a skilled union worker, there's no place to get that skill.
Hmm.
And that disproportionately, of course, affects Black communities because, for various reasons, trade education has been all but non-existent in most urban areas. Vocational schools have been shut down. Those schools moved out to the suburbs, and so those good union jobs in the building trades we're not the Black community is not prepared for that, and there's no preparation in this bill for that.
So hold on, Dr. Tauheed, for a second. Let me, just for people who are watching who may be a little bit younger than the both of us and who may not understand
Mhm,
unions and how getting a union job works. Because I mean, I
mhm,
think there's been a whole shift away from unions in this
mhm,
country that is
mhm.
quite widespread,
Yeah.
where you have entire generations of people who are now just learning about unions again.
Mhm,
When a good union job was kind of literally the backbone of American
mhm,
workers and worker culture in this
mhm,
country for a long time. So why
mhm.
why is it so hard to get a union job these days, especially for Black folks?
Well, let's go back to a little bit of 20th century union history.
Mm,
Going earlier than that, but 20th century union history, the union workers or workers in the building trades begin to express their power because the economy was growing, but there was not enough labor. And so, if you are in an industry where there's demand for your labor, you might have more power. And if you collectively argue for that increase in wages and benefits, then you have more power to force that. Now, understand, in the early part of the 20th century, unions in this country were segregated. So both the AFL and CIO, as two separate organizations at the time, did not allow Black workers to enter. It was the CIO that first integrated their unions, and coincidentally, the first major union to integrate was the coal miners union in West Virginia. And there's a West
mhm.
Virginia story in this, right? But what union jobs meant was that people collectively organized to go and ask for higher wages. Union membership was increasing till about the middle of the 20th century, 1950s, and then started to decline. And kind of the real nail in the coffin in terms of union loss of power came when Ronald Reagan broke up the strike on the air traffic controllers,
Right.
who went on strike, and Reagan, said, stop this, and started bringing in other persons to non-union people to run the air traffic control system. That began a process, a kind of a free for all for breaking unions. We saw not so long ago, Amazon in Kentucky, workers were trying to organize, and the result of that is that those workers did not meet their goals in terms of voting. But then we find out that Amazon has been manipulating the vote, and it's those kind of things. Now, normally, or at least in the union building time in this country, if a corporation was manipulating the vote, the National Labor Relations Board would step in and
Right.
and do something. But they haven't done that certainly since Reagan.
Yeah, yeah.
So union jobs have gone down, have decreased, and there I think about 18% of workers are in unions when
Wow.
it's been a lot more than that before. It may be 18, maybe 14 if I'm remembering correctly. It's very few
Wow, I didn't
of workers.
realize it decreased that much.
Yes, yes,
Wow.
quite a
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, the
And so
Patco strike.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, no, yeah, Paco strike exactly. But I was saying that President Biden said there'll be 2 million new union jobs. Well, we'll see. We'll
Yeah,
see. There's lots of non-union workers in building trades.
yeah, and I frequently remember a story that my late husband Abdul Shahid Lukman, who was a truck driver by trade,
Hmm.
used to say when he and a friend of his, back before he got his CDL and was looking for a union job, and all of
Hmm.
these union shops had help wanted and apprenticeships open and that kind of thing, applications, accepting applications for apprenticeships after they had gone through this federal training program,
Hmm.
or a state training program, because he was from New Jersey, in Camden, New Jersey. He and his friend, they were black, would go to
Hmm.
these union shops and try to apply for these union apprenticeships and would
Hmm.
get turned down.
Right.
They would immediately be told by the, usually white, well, always white shop steward,
Hmm.
oh yeah, we forgot to take that sign out of the window. We don't have any spots open
Right.
for apprenticeship. So, racism has been a serious problem, even in union jobs, in Black people
Hmm.
getting union jobs, and Latinx people getting union jobs as well in this
Right.
country, even at the height, the heyday of unionism. So
Right.
that's always a story that sticks in my mind.
Yes, yes, yes. And of course, unions, at least the unions, increase in unions was responsible for the rise of the middle class,
Mm,
of ensuring that more of the revenue, the extra revenue, we'll say, went not into profit but went into wages, right? And that trend has been turned around certainly since the early 70s, in which wages have been flat, pretty
mm,
much
mhm.
flat in terms of real earning power, whereas profits have skyrocketed because worker productivity has gone up, but they haven't
Right.
received the benefit of that productivity. There's nothing in this bill that will change that trend. And so it's a good thing to build roads and bridges, but the question is who's going to get the work?
That's the question, and that's, I think, where we're gonna kind of where that's where we're getting to in
Mhm.
talking about who the winners are
Mhm.
in this infrastructure bill, because as we're talking about the whole climate change issue, Dr. Tauheed, and COP26 I think it has wrapped up,
Mhm.
and um, obviously the world leaders, especially from the global north countries, did exactly what they've been doing, which is uh, over promising on a bunch of nothing, really,
Mhm.
that's not
Mhm.
going to get
Mhm.
us to the benchmark that we need to really avert
Mhm.
global climate catastrophe. I think
Right.
it's important to point out, as you mentioned, that Mitch McConnell was making more of a big deal about this infrastructure bill than the Democrats were, because, I mean, one of the big winners of the infrastructure bill is the fossil fuel
Mhm.
industry. And this is
Mhm.
not something that I pointed out. This was
Right.
actually something that Democratic Congressman Jared Huffman
Mhm.
uh, pointed out at COP26 in Glasgow,
Mhm.
where he said that this infrastructure bill could actually worsen climate
Mhm.
change.
Mhm.
And he noted that unless it's paired with the Build Back Better bill,
Yeah.
um, but he said, interestingly, that most of this infrastructure bill could have been written in the 1980s. And I thought that was really striking, Dr. Tawheed,
Mhm.
because we have been looking at the the cause of climate change, I think, at least from the media perspective, in a very individualistic kind of way. You
Hmm.
know, it's all about individual recycling and individual
Hmm.
efforts and individual people reducing their carbon footprint, when we understand that it's really about 100 or so large, massive corporations that are
Hmm.
contributing the most
Right.
to climate change. Not that individual people shouldn't change our individual consumption habits,
Hmm.
but I thought it was striking that he said that this infrastructure bill could have been written in the 80s,
Hmm.
because we're talking about a bill that is written on based on estimates of repairing things in this country that were broken 30 years ago,
Hmm.
40 years ago.
Yes, yes.
And this was 30, 40 years ago,
Hmm.
before I think we understood the impact of the fossil fuel industry,
Right, right.
uh, and the damage they have caused. So, I mean, what does it say that a congressman was at
Hmm.
COP26 and
Hmm.
said this infrastructure bill is probably going to make climate change worse?
Well, it's a bill that that does is very inadequate in terms of clean energy production and renewable energy. We're talking about $7.5 billion out of a $1.2 trillion bill for clean energy for electric vehicles, and about 21 billion for pollution. Think of Superfund, cleaning up sites that have already been polluted. So it's not abating anything; it's just continuing to clean up. There's a need for high speed internet, particularly in rural areas, for revitalizing Amtrak and passenger trains. That's all of that. But those structures, those transportation systems are running on power systems that are fueled by fossil fuel, right? Unless we're fueling them by dams like the Tennessee or so forth. And in the West they're having drought, so that dam flow is
Right.
low because
Hmm.
of climate change.
Hmm.
And so you could have written this bill in the 1980s, because in the 1980s this is probably about the level of infrastructure and climate change abatement that would have actually helped then, but it's nowhere near adequate now.
Mm.
And now COP 26, the G20, the European nations mainly promised that they would fund climate issues, climate abatement in quote developing countries. They reneged on that. They're not sending them a dollar. And so there have been discussions about, for example, coal as a fossil fuel and how it is the most polluting. Well, in most developing countries, people are using coal for heat and fuel. Why? Because you can go dig it up yourself.
Hmm.
You don't need a
Hmm.
pipeline to you, and it's readily available. And so, persons in developing countries are using coal. And when the sulfuric acid enters the atmosphere from the coal, it doesn't just stay over the country where it's reduced. It goes
Right.
everywhere. And so, for the European nations not to want to help these quote developing countries to develop their energy structures is I think not only short-sighted, but it is I would say it this way: it is a capitalist approach to energy to climate change. That is,
Mm.
if you help these developing countries to develop their energy grids in a non-polluting renewable energy way, those countries will actually be ahead of European countries in terms of energy production. And energy production means that they will become more competitive. So, you can't help the developing countries because they're your competitors, but you're going to breathe the results of that coal production.
Yeah, capitalist juggernaut like the United States and the global North countries in general
Hmm.
absolutely will not allow competition from anyone, and certainly
Right.
not those developing countries. Many. of those countries that those very same capitalist global north countries are stealing resources from
Hmm.
other resources,
Hmm.
and exploiting those people. So no, can't have those people competing on the global market with the exploiters at all. um,
Right.
Dr. Tauheed, one aspect of this bill that Huffman pointed out that I thought was really particularly shocking was that there is a 25 billion loan guarantee for a
Mm-hmm.
new liquefied natural gas facility that's being constructed in Alaska.
Hmm.
Uh, don't you have to dig, drill for oil? Don't you have to? Isn't that a horrible, horrible thing to do, to build another fossil fuel facility in Alaska of all places? And Huffman points out that
Hmm.
the investment for this new liquefied natural gas facility is actually larger than any investment for clean energy in the entire
Hmm.
bill. That
Yeah.
that
Well,
is just underhanded.
yeah. Well, one thing, the U.S. is an exporter of liquefied natural gas, so
Mhm.
we can't make the argument that we need this for national security or for just economic production here. They are an exporter of that. In fact, exporter of fossil fuels in terms of oil and so forth. So we're going way beyond the need. And yeah, if the priorities get set in terms of what you're willing to, if you're willing to build to bring fossil fuel production by drilling for oil or natural gas into production, while you're also claiming that you're going to do something to offset climate change, you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. There's very little here. The most of the climate change funding was supposed to be in the other bill,
Mm-hmm.
the Build Back Better bill. These two bills started out as about $6 trillion of
Right.
promises from Joe Biden during his campaign of what he was going to do. Joe Biden wanted to do something bipartisan so much he allowed that to be split off into two bills, one of which is the physical infrastructure bill, the bipartisan bill, and then the social infrastructure bill. All the things that he promised for ordinary people went into the other bill, and that's been whittled down to pretty much nothing. And as you mentioned, there was the vote, of course, was for the bipartisan bill that passed. What Nancy Pelosi had originally promised, and what the Progressive Caucus was wanting, was that both of those bills come up for an up or down vote at the same time, and
Right.
she promised that. And she tried at a month or so ago to go against that promise and was pushed back. But apparently, the compromise on that is not that they both don't both go forward. The compromise is that you vote on the Republican bill. I'll call it that. You vote on
Mm-hmm.
the Republican bill and you pass that, and then you vote on the terms for debate of the social infrastructure bill. You don't vote on the bill. You don't even actually have a bill yet. What you have is an agreement to debate what goes in the bill. And for the quote conservative Democrats, they're insisting that this bill has to be scored by the Congressional Budget Office before they'll even commit to whether or not they'll vote. Now, what the Congressional Budget Office does is they take a piece of legislation and they determine whether or not this will add to the deficit or not. The original bill was to be paid for by increases in corporate taxes
Right.
and increases on taxation of wealthy individuals, those, well, high earning individuals, those making
Mm-hmm.
over 400,000 a year,
Mm-hmm.
and closing certain deductions in terms of how capital gains and other things are paid out or chosen to be taxed or not, right? Well, all that's gone. That's gone. So the question is, the bill can't pay for itself as it goes forward. So the Congressional Budget Office will come back and say that this bill is not balanced.
Mm.
So when you push this bill, which has fewer and fewer what are called pay fors, over to the Congressional Budget Office, you're kind of doing the same thing that they did in the Senate with the reconciliation bill with immigration. They asked the parliamentarian, "Is this good?" And the parliamentarian said no, and they said,
Hmm.
"Well, we can't do anything because the parliamentarian said there's nothing in the law that or in procedure that requires the Senate to follow the parliamentarian's guidelines.
Right.
And when you send things to the CBO, which they don't have to do, you're basically saying, I want the CBO to kill this bill. And and
Mm.
that and that's what I expect to happen. Now that's the the social infrastructure bill that originally had things like funding for HBCUs,
Right. Right.
right? That originally had things like well, the child tax credit that came into effect
Hmm.
during the pandemic. It had that it would have made that a permanent tax credit. The new bill has 1 year. So think about this: the child tax credit that was part of the pandemic was advertised as lifting 50% of the nation's children out of poverty.
Right.
Now, what happens when you stop that?
They
Those who
go
came
right.
from poverty go back into poverty.
Yes.
How is that a sane thing to do?
So
But
wait, I'm sorry. Hold on, Dr. Tauheed. You said that the child tax credits that the that the reconciliation bill was supposed to make permanent
yeah,
have now been extended to just 1 year
1 year, just
in
1 year.
in the infrastructure bill that was just passed.
No, not in that bill. It's not in that bill.
Oh, oh,
It's in the Build Back Better bill.
oh, so it's only going to be extended for 1 year
If
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 that
if
bill
it's passed, if that bill passes.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, this
So
just gets worse.
yeah, so yeah. Look, I suppose we could say that anything is better than nothing, but this is as close to nothing as you can get, considering the need.
Yeah.
And so now there are a couple of things that are being used to kind of push this back. One of is this talk of inflation. There's the consumer price index went up 6.2% compared to last year. In other words, the prices of goods increased by 6.2% compared to what the prices of goods did a year ago. Well, the prices of a year ago, the prices of goods were declining. We were in deflation.
Mm-hmm.
And so if the prices of goods don't change at all from 1 month to another, it's going to be higher than it was last year.
Wow.
But the idea of inflation is being used to say, all right, we spent enough money. Now you passed a $1.2 trillion bipartisan bill, but we spent too much money. If we spend more money, we will overheat the economy. We'll have inflation. And conservative economists, which is most economists, right, are saying that no, we don't want to risk inflation. We can't spend even a dollar more. A dollar more will push us over the cliff. That's the argument, so-called, from economists to basically say we've already done enough. So
Mm.
that social infrastructure bill, which has good things in it, but not as much as it had before, is being kicked to the curb.
Wow. I just and the argument that you just explained that conservative economists and conservative politicians and increasingly so-called liberal politicians
Yeah,
use that they don't want to overheat the economy. They never have this argument when they're talking about giving money to the Department of Defense. Never,
absolutely.
ever, never. The
Yeah.
National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA,
Hmm.
the piece of legislation that funds the Department of Defense, they get upwards of $800 billion every single year. And by
Hmm.
upwards, I mean over 700 billion. This year, it's
Hmm.
787 billion dollars. This infrastructure bill is $1.2 trillion
For over 10 years.
over 10 years. $1.2 trillion
Over
over
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah, a little more than $100 billion per year.
If you take if the defense budget stays static at
Hmm.
$787 billion a year
Hmm.
over the next 10 years, I don't trust my math. Dr. Tauheed, how much money is that?
Well, that's approximately 7 trillion, almost $8 trillion, right?
Easy,
Yeah,
easy. And that's
yeah.
not even including the $1 to $2 trillion that the Department of Energy gets for the nuclear arsenal,
Hmm.
because that's the nuclear arsenal is housed within the Department of Energy, not the Department of Defense. So that's
Right.
not a part of the defense budget.
Hmm.
And all of this money that the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, loses every year because they never pass an audit, because who cares what they're doing?
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
the
there's an estimated $6 trillion that's not accounted for in the Pentagon budget.
it just
Over the years, it's just nobody knows where it went.
it just disappeared into the courtyard in the middle. They don't know where it went. Just went up
Right.
somewhere. Um, one aspect of this infrastructure bill that you mentioned before a little
Hmm.
bit earlier that I want to get into, and that was the question or the point you raised about who will who will get the money for this work. Now, I argue, Dr. Tawheed, that although some jobs will be created, and I
Hmm.
know that the Republican governors want this money, they of course they do, but I think that because McConnell and the
Hmm.
Republicans are so excited about this bill, that I'm thinking this bill is a Trojan horse for
Hmm.
privatization.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I thought you were going down when you were going down the list of things that were in the bill. You would get to that, but this is something in the bill that is under a couple of different names. They don't use the term privatization.
Mm-hmm.
It's either public-private partnership or
Mm-hmm.
asset recycling. What both of those terms mean is that there is an arrangement that will be set up so that private corporations can, quote, put in a little money, own the public asset, buy public assets, and as a result, they get to receive all of the revenue that would come to those public assets for 50, 75, 99 years on a lease, or if they buy it, it's forever. And so, for example, that the type of deal happened in Chicago when Rahm Emanuel was the mayor, when he sold off all the parking meters to a private company. I forget the name of the company,
Mm-hmm.
but the company, well, it was actually a lease, right? It was a lease for the parking meters, and parking meters are mostly downtown. And so, you lease the parking meters to the company. The company says, well, we have to make a profit. So what you were paying to park before, we're going to charge you that. But then we also need to charge more to make a profit.
Mm-hmm.
But supposedly we will, maintain the parking meters better than the government, than the city of Chicago. Uh, these type of things never work out that way. But the prices of parking starts to go up and up and up,
Right.
and there's a clause in these kind of deals that is really insane. If the city of Chicago were to, let's say, one day have a parade downtown, and they have to close off a section of downtown parking, downtown streets that has parking meters,
Mm-hmm.
the city of Chicago has to pay the company that now owns the parking meters for the revenue that they lost.
On
In other
so-called
words,
public streets that are
right,
supposed to be
exactly.
owned and maintained by the city of Chicago.
Yes, and so capitalism is supposed to be an enterprise where you, as an entrepreneur, you go into business, and if you do well, you sell product, you make money. If you don't do well, you're supposed to go out of business.
Hmm.
These companies, they can't go out of business, and they're not too big to fail. They just are, they just will never fail, because they will always be able to claim that the city is somehow disrupting their revenue, therefore they should be paid.
Wow.
Now that's an example. That's a small example.
Oh my
When we
gosh.
talk about asset recycling, where a state, the federal highway system is a federal system, but it's owned by each state. each state owns and manages their portion of the federal highway system. So, for example, in Indiana, when Mike Pence was governor, he sold off a part of the Indiana highway system to private corporation. And I remember the first time I noticed this. I live in Kansas City, but I'm from Philadelphia, so I'm driving back to Philadelphia, and I get off the highway in Indiana, no problem. I get back on, no problem. And then some weeks later, I get a bill. That's a toll bill,
Hmm.
you got off the Indiana highway and you got back on, you have to pay this toll. I'm saying I didn't even go through a toll booth, right? They sent you a
Uh-huh.
bill that says you owe the state of Indiana. So what happens when these public roads are sold off to private corporations is they used to put toll booths, but they don't have to do that. They just have license plate recognizers, and they'll
Right.
send you a bill. And so now a highway that you could ride on that you pay taxes for. Now you still have to pay the taxes. I mean, your
Hmm.
taxes are going to go down because the road is owned by another corporation. That's part of the revenue for that corporation.
Oh my
But now
gosh.
you're going to be charged a toll for doing that. Asset recycling is another name for it. That name comes from when this type of process was used in Australia, and I think it was about 7 or 8 years after they started the process, they stopped it. They said we had enough of this high prices and tolls that are put on roads and so forth, and price increases. So they had the sense to stop it, but now it's in the U.S. It's in this bill, and
Wow.
and in my thinking, that's the thing. The Republicans would have loved the bill if that's the only thing it had in the bill.
Mm.
The rest of it, they don't really care about.
Right.
Um,
Now, I have this article up because I was reading it before we came on. This was actually posted in the published in the American Prospect, and this actually was published in June of this
mhm,
year.
right.
And they talk about everything that you are mentioning,
Hmm.
everything that you're explaining, and that's why I didn't want to get into it because I probably wouldn't have been able to explain it as well as you can. I
Hmm.
know I wouldn't have been able to explain it as well as you did, Dr. Tauheed. But this is the part of this public private partnership asset recycling in this particular bill that is so, aside from the fact that it's in the bill,
Hmm.
the Democrats who passed this bill with asset recycling in it
Hmm.
opposed the exact same thing that Donald Trump was suggesting when he was talking about his infrastructure bill in his administration. So, why were, and this is a rhetorical question. I'm not, asking for an actual answer because we
Yeah.
know the answer. The Democrats are no different from the Republicans, but the Democrats did make a huge deal about
Hmm.
opposing the Trump
Right.
administration
Right. Right.
and his infrastructure bill because of this particular provision. But now
Hmm.
all of a sudden, under the Biden administration,
It's
it's
okay.
perfectly all right.
Yeah. The Trump episode is interesting because it was in the bill. Trump didn't really understand what he probably never read the bill, but he was initially campaigning for it and then changed his mind. Someone must and he actually pointed out that this process failed in Indiana. I'm no
Mm,
longer in support. In other words, he's saying my vice president Mike Pence is responsible for that debacle in Indiana. I've changed my mind. So
yeah.
he actually came to the right side too late. But Democrats were opposing it at the time, and now it's in the bill. Not only is it in the bill, there is a provision in the bill for the executive branch to create a department that promotes this asset recycling or public-private partnerships around the country. So it's not like it's just up to local, state and local governments to sell off their roads and bridges and water and power plants and power grids and so forth. The federal government actually will create an agency that will incentivize them by giving states and cities money to sell off their assets to private corporations. And what's supposed to happen is, you have a water plant and the private entity says, here's 1/10 of the worth of the water plant. We know you need this money because tax revenues are down and so forth. So you take this money, and we'll take over the water plant. And that example in Chicago, with the parking meters, led to an 800% increase in parking meter fees in Chicago. Now, Chicago parking meter fees were not low to begin with,
Oh
but
my
an
God.
800% increase. And that's for a parking meter. What happens when it's your street outside of your home, the highway you have to get on, the water department, the power grid, and so forth, in private hands? That's what public-private partnership means. The public gets to be in bed with the private entity and basically sell off all of its assets.
Oh my gosh. That is I
Yeah.
let
And
me
the
let me
opposite, that's the really scary part, and that is the scary part.
and I'm thinking of a couple of things, Dr. Tauheed, and I think I want people to understand why this is so horrendous. First of all, shout out to Ab Baraka in the chats.
Mhm.
Everybody knows who Ajamu Baraka is, of my national organizer of the Black Alliance for Peace. Public-private partnerships was modeled in Black-led cities back in the 80s.
Mhm.
We know what happened to many of our cities back in the 80s, where the privatization, it was like we were the testing grounds
Mhm.
almost for
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
kind of privatizations. And we see how that's worked out, right?
Mhm.
But I'm
Yeah.
also thinking, Dr. Tawheed, about places like uh, uh, Georgia, down in Georgia.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of Cooperation Jackson
Mhm.
and the water crisis, the infrastructure crisis that they're having in that city,
Mhm.
where Mayor Chokwe Lumumba, I think I'm getting my names correctly
Yeah.
correct.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
he was I mean the
Between a rock and a hard
infrastructure.
place.
I, Thank you for saying it, because I
Yeah.
didn't I mean it's a touchy situation, but really he inherited a bankrupt city and
Mhm.
fighting privatization of the decrepit water system that I mean people can't rely on the public water system,
Right. Right.
and I'm thinking of this type of provision in this bill negatively affecting those Black communities. I'm thinking of
Mhm.
Flint,
Mhm.
Michigan.
Mhm.
I'm thinking of Lowndes County, Alabama, with the open sewage, spilling into people's. Yeah, this infrastructure bill,
Mhm.
it sounds to me, is not going to help these people, because what's going to happen is another like Texas snowstorm kind of situation, where you've got a
Mhm.
private corporation that
Mhm.
has taken over the power grid like they did in
Right.
Texas.
Exactly.
And when a snowstorm happens, they are not the infrastructure is not outfitted for the
Mhm.
demand, and the
Yeah.
private corporations don't care because they have their money.
There are certain enterprises that you should be cooperative with instead of competitive with,
Mm.
right? And a power grid is one of those. So what Texas did is basically, when they privatized the Texas power grid, they basically shut off the power grid, the access to the rest of the country.
Hmm.
And so if you're in Texas and your power system is failing, you could buy power from Oklahoma, except it's got to come through this private corporation that will jack up the price if it does that. And you should be cooperating, but that cooperation means that the cooperation would means that the private enterprise would have less control.
And thank
It's,
you.
it's, it's the same. It's the same with roads and bridges, right?
Yeah.
How do you have Coca-Cola managing the highway system in Missouri,
Hmm.
and Pepsi managing the highway system in Illinois? Well, they're competitors, so that's a
Right, right. And thank you again, Black Power Media Chat, for correcting me. Y'all know that I'm a little bit scatterbrained these days because of everything that's going on. Jackson, Mississippi is
yeah.
where Cooperation Jackson is. Thank you for the correction. All right. As bad as everything else that we've talked about in this infrastructure bill is, Dr. Tauheed, I think this is the worst part.
Yes,
And let
absolutely.
me share this screen for folks because I mean, I I cease to be surprised at what the
Mm,
Congressional Black Caucus is willing to do
yeah.
to maintain their seat at the table. But this really, really ticked me off. If you want to know how this terrible bill actually made it across the line and how the progressives were, how there were, how the end around was played on the progressives, well, you can thank the Congressional Black Caucus for that because this is reported in the New York Times. Look, I don't like them as a source, but this is actually true. It's what happened.
Mm,
Nancy Pelosi realized that she could not, but people hate Nancy Pelosi, basically. So what she did was to listen to the Congressional Black Caucus, who were the ones who apparently came up with this idea to vote for the infrastructure bill right now and
yeah.
then hold a good faith procedural vote on the larger bill, what you
Hmm.
explained earlier, Dr. Tauheed. That
Hmm.
idea came from the Congressional Black Caucus.
Yeah, I think that's a narrative, but I don't believe it happened that way.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
what the way I believe it happened is that Nancy Pelosi and her leadership team, which include James Clyburn, were sitting around figuring out how they could neuter the progressives. How can we get
Mm,
them to come to heel? And the idea came that if you get the Congressional Black Caucus to speak out in favor of the bill, it would be difficult for the white progressives to be against this bill.
oh.
And I think the narrative is played out by the fact that you have the quote black progressives, the members of the squad, who voted against the bill. They
Hmm.
couldn't be pressured by white guilt into abandoning their progressive position, and so the Congressional Black Caucus was used as the wedge to break the mixing metaphors, but to break the flow here to allow the Republican bill to come through, right? And so I don't think that the Congressional Black, because if the Congressional Black Caucus had that kind of insight and power, then let's say in August when the Build Back Better bill was at $3.5 trillion and had
Hmm.
things like funding for HBCUs and had a billionaire tax and had paid family leave and had negotiation for drug prices and 2 year free college, all of those things would help the African American community, their constituents, more. They would have said to Joe Manchin as he was trying to chip that away, Joe, go away. They would have
Okay,
said, if
that's a
they
good
really
point.
had power, they would have intervened and say, our community, the black community, needs this. So Joe Manchin, we're not going to allow you to take those things out. They would have spoke up earlier, but they didn't. They waited until the social infrastructure bill is down to quote 1.75 trillion, and then they go and say, we talked to the Progressive Caucus behind closed doors, and they have agreed. Most of those members agreed to provide enough votes to get the Republican bill passed in out of the House. So that seems strange to me that the Congressional Black Caucus leaders didn't speak up earlier for the Build Back Better bill when it was in the interest of the black community and their constituents to do so.
So let me pose this to you. Do you think that the Democratic leadership is both making the Congressional Black Caucus kind of the scapegoats
No, I
for
think they're making them heroes. They're making them
ah
heroes because they want to make the squad and the progressives the scapegoats.
so here's the
This is
other,
this is this is this is the rallying that Clyburn did in South
right?
Carolina
Hmm.
to rally the quote black community against Bernie Sanders, right?
See,
Against,
I See, I spent so many of the past few years, Dr. Tauheed, making this point that the
Mhm,
Congressional Black Caucus are not our friends, that they do
mhm,
not represent the interests of working class and poor Black people in particular, which is, in the states that they represent where there is a significant Black population,
mhm.
they don't represent much of their own demographic.
Right.
But I guess people are just tired of hearing me say it because they don't believe me. So I just really wanted you to say it because
I'll even be more general than that. Both the Democrats and the Republicans, with few exceptions on the Democrats, the progressives, and not all of them, represent their donors. In fact, I
Mhm.
would say that, and we'll say that the members of the squad represent their donors. Their donors just happen to be people like you and me, right? And
Mhm.
so when you get politicians who are getting lots of money, you talk about cinema and Manchin getting millions of dollars in opposing the progressive parts of the social infrastructure bill. They're getting that from big donors, big pharma, from fossil fuel, but so do other Democrats and so do other Republicans. And so they're all representing their donors. The question is who their donors are.
That's right. And this is always the point that we have to get to when we're having any conversation about
Mhm,
any policy that comes from Capitol Hill, regardless of whether it comes from Republicans or Democrats, but in particular, especially when it comes from Democratic administrations, because I feel like it's really easy for us to point out the serious flaws in
mhm,
Republican, because
mhm.
I mean they make it easy. The Republicans make no bones about not caring if people die. they
They're
really
unashamed.
they
Absolutely.
are completely unashamed. People are always asking about Republicans. Oh my God, have they no shame? No, they don't. They've
Mhm,
made it quite clear that shame is really not a part of their,
mhm.
makeup. So I don't understand why people continue to be surprised at the horrible things Republicans do. But we keep comparing the niceness of Democrats to the obvious, you know, overt evil of Republicans, and we come away with believing that the Democrats are significantly better
Mhm.
in the efforts that they put forward legislatively. And then we never get to ask that question that we just brought up, Dr. Tauheed. Who are the donors who
Mhm.
benefit from these legislative efforts that Democrats push?
Mhm. Yeah.
And
It,
when we look at this infrastructure bill and we see that it is private corporations, the fossil fuel industry, and a lot of these Republican politicians and their friends who
mhm.
will benefit more than we do, I don't see how we can be excited about this infrastructure bill.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's in many cases a tale of two cities.
Mm,
There will be those who will benefit tremendously from this bill, and there will be those who will be hurt by the neglect that this bill, uh, by what's not in this bill. The kind of things that Joe Biden campaigned on. You remember the Lift Every Voice plan?
oh God.
You remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, that promise basically promised everything. But none of that is in this bill. Or very little of that is in this bill. There's some of that in well, there's some of that in the bipartisan bill. There's also some of that in the quote yet to be seen social infrastructure bill, Build Back Better bill, which I don't think will be seen, uh,
Mm,
except perhaps symbolically. It'll be crumbs off the table. And the thing that's used to whittle that down is inflation. Inflation. We can't spend another dollar. Then it goes to the CBO and they say we can't pay for this bill. Now you could pay for the bill if you put back the billionaire tax and all that, but that's gone. And so this
mm.
bill is going to the corporate Democrats. No Republican is going to vote for that bill. But the corporate Democrats will give in to say, I'm sorry, we don't want to overheat the economy with inflation. We can't spend another dollar. You were talking about the defense industry.
Hmm.
The different kinds of spending has different inflationary effects. And it goes
Okay.
back to supply and demand. If I put $1 into the economy, if the government puts another dollar into the economy, and there's another loaf of bread that gets produced as a result of that, then there's supply and demand are balanced, right? The more demand means more supply.
Right.
When you push money into the economy to build a cruise missile, there's no additional bread that gets
Right.
created in that
What do we
process.
get?
Yeah, yeah. And so the cruise missiles are built and they sit on the shelf. Now, if they can't sit on the shelf too long because then the revenue to the weapons producers dries up. So they eventually have to be spent, be used. But in the meantime, you can't go to the store and buy a cruise missile. There's no balance of supply and demand. So there's more money in the economy. There's nothing new to buy, and that's caused inflation. We learned that lesson during Vietnam, and
Wow.
particularly the last parts in the 1970s when we had what we call stagflation. We had
That's, yep.
inflation, but the
Hmm.
economy wasn't doing well. That's because of all of that spending in Vietnam.
Mm. I just, okay, let me end on this, Dr. Tauheed, because I really want people who are watching, especially working class and poor Black folks and Latinx folks and the rest of us who are broke,
Mhm,
to really understand the situation we are in. This
mhm,
is from Statista, um,
mhm,
big old statistics clearinghouse kind of place. And this is the median household income in the US in 2020 by race
mhm,
or ethnic group. Here we are down at the bottom. Median
mhm,
income of your average Black family is
mhm.
$45,870. When we look at this infrastructure bill, what do we tell your average Black family that has a median income, has an income of around $45,000, if that much?
Mhm,
And many of us, it's less. What do
mhm,
we tell those folks about what they should do, understanding
mhm.
the insufficiencies in this infrastructure bill to address their current economic situation and the economic situation they're going to be in for the next 10 years, which is not going to change that much politically? What do we tell those people to do, Dr. Tauheed?
Well, if things continue on as they are, there are estimates that, for example, that the Black community and things like median income is catching up with the white community. Well, well, that just means that the median income increase for white communities is slowing down. You know, and there's an estimate that it'll take over 200 years at the rate of catching up for us to actually catch up. So I don't think we can quite wait that long. And so these infrastructure bills, which are focused on if that have something in them that might alleviate, might be addressed at class, right, helping the working class, will help those Black members of the working class to the percentage that we're parts of the working class.
Hmm.
So if, for example, we talked about this for building trades persons. If the Black community was equitably represented in the building trade, then we would expect to get an equitable portion, but we're not. That means that those who get pushed ahead by such an infrastructure bill will create a gap with those who are not ready for those jobs. And as we mentioned, there's no job training. There's also no 2 year college, no free 2 year college in this
That's
bill.
right.
That's a huge that would have been a huge thing to have had. I'm a supporter of at least free 4 year college, but 2 years is 2 years ahead of not having to have bills. There was also Pell Grant increases in Pell Grants in that proposal that's out. And so building trades or other kinds of trades. For example, there's an expansion of the Affordable Care Act Medicare expansion and other kinds of things that is projected. If it comes, it actually will expand access to health care. Now we have to be very careful because money comes out of the U.S. Treasury to insurance companies to provide insurance for folks who can't afford the deductible. So maybe they can go see the doctor one time, but when they get that bill, they can't go back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the insurance companies basically reaching into the treasury and pulling out extra money. But if you're going to have improvement in healthcare, you need more healthcare professionals.
Hmm.
uh, 2-year college would have created more healthcare professionals. Otherwise, the price of
Wow.
healthcare goes up because the supply of
Wow.
healthcare professionals doesn't go up. All of these things are interconnected, and the things that are not in this bill will hurt us as much as the things that are in this bill.
I mean, and this is why I like having these conversations about these very unsexy topics, because people like to get on these platforms and talk about things that everybody else is talking about, the latest controversy, the latest celebrity, whatever. My contention is, y'all in Black Power Media know me well enough by now. My contention is we don't have time for that. We don't
Mhm.
have time to, I like a good distraction like everybody else, but our people are we're floundering when and we're dying, and we don't have time
No.
to waste a whole lot of our time wasting time. So we need to know what it is that we are fighting for, and the only
Right.
way to know that is to know how we're being shortchanged. So
Right.
I mean, Dr. Tauheed, I really thank you for laying this out. I'm going to give you the last couple of minutes to say whatever you want, and just your final thoughts on what people
Mhm.
really need to take from this.
Yeah, I think politically, I think the media wants to make the Congressional Black Caucus the hero, but in my estimation, in our conversation here, they were just a tool to be used to when it's convenient, and that's almost always the case. And so we really need to focus on representation for our community that is authentic. Now, many, possibly many on this channel would be for a separate black party. I think that's a good idea in terms of organizing. You have to organize people. But then you have to have people who will come if they're, to campaign to hold them accountable to the things that they promise. And since most of our black politicians have already been through the campaign cycle at least once and not performed, we need we need a different group of persons that we can elect. So that if there's a possibility of a congressional black caucus that actually has some power, it's only going to come because we replace persons who are willing to stand and be firm, like the members of the squad did. I think in the end they will be recognized as persons who did the right thing, and we need many more like
Mm.
that.
Well, folks, thank you so much for joining and hanging out with us tonight. Please, please, please be engaged in political education,
Right.
connected to an organization in your communities. It's great to be self-taught. That's partially how I became such a smart ass. But I honed that information. I sharpened that information. I expanded my understanding of capitalism and imperialism in organization, studying with other people, being under the guidance of other people, and learning some discipline in some things that I wouldn't have learned by myself. So, as Kwame Ture used to say, organize, organize, organize. Thank you so much, Dr. Tawheed. I
Thank you.
appreciate your time this evening. And y'all,
Thank
thanks
you.
a lot for watching and joining us. I'll be back on tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. So come hang out with us then on Black Power Media. Until then, y'all be really, really good to each other and take very good care of yourselves. Peace.
I had them online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Poe believed in me, pull up, threw some bucks down. Todd told the valet pull the truck round. Push the line after we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best from my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify, tap you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, you're too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for they prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the lead to see what's planted. I had them all online before I dialed up.